Eagles fans, it feels like something important may be developing behind the scenes in Philadelphia. Every offseason brings rumors, questions, and speculation, but sometimes a few separate stories start pointing toward a much bigger picture. Right now, there are two situations unfolding that could have a major impact on the future of this franchise. One could completely change how this year's draft plays out. The other may reveal how Howie Roseman is preparing for the next chapter of the Eagles. And honestly, when you connect both stories together, it raises some fascinating questions. Before we dive in, make sure to like and subscribe. When you look around the NFL right now, one of the biggest stories developing involves a player Eagles fans know very well. Dexter Lawrence has been one of the most dominant defensive tackles in football for years, and Philadelphia has had to deal with him twice every season. Jason Kelce talked about how difficult those matchups were. Cam Jurgens has experienced it. The Eagles' offensive line has spent years trying to slow down one of the most physically imposing defenders in football. Now reports suggest that Lawrence and the Giants may be heading toward a breaking point. Contract discussions appear to have stalled. Some reports indicate that conversations have completely broken off. And there is growing speculation that teams around the league could begin aggressively exploring trade possibilities. At first glance, this may sound like a Giants story. But when you step back and look at everything, it could have a much larger impact on Philadelphia than most people realize. The reason this matters is not necessarily because the Eagles would pursue Dexter Lawrence themselves. In fact, with the defensive tackle talent already on this roster, that scenario seems highly unlikely. The bigger issue is what a move like that could do to the rest of the draft. Whenever a player of that caliber suddenly becomes available, front offices start changing their plans. Draft boards move. Team priorities shift. Organizations begin exploring options they weren't considering a few weeks earlier. And when that happens, opportunities start appearing throughout the board. A prospect expected to go early suddenly falls. A team changes direction. Another team decides to trade back. And that is exactly the type of environment where Howie Roseman has historically done some of his best work. Eagles fans have seen it happen before. When the board becomes unpredictable, Roseman often finds value where other teams fail to see it. What's interesting is that reports around the league suggest this draft could become one of the most trade-heavy drafts in recent memory. Several executives believe movement throughout the first round could be significant, especially because some position groups are considered stronger than others, and because teams appear eager to accumulate additional selections on day two. That creates an environment filled with opportunity for a front office like Philadelphia's. The Eagles are not entering this draft desperate to fill major holes. They're entering from a position of strength. That's a major difference. Teams drafting from desperation often force decisions. Teams drafting from strength can focus purely on value. And when you listen carefully to Howie Roseman's recent comments, it becomes clear that he understands exactly how much flexibility Philadelphia currently possesses. Roseman made it clear that if an opportunity presents itself, the Eagles would not be afraid to move up. He didn't promise a trade. He didn't guarantee anything. But Eagles fans know how he operates. This is a general manager who constantly thinks several moves ahead. He's never been content simply sitting back and hoping the board falls his way. If there's a player he believes can become a cornerstone piece for the future, history suggests he will at least explore the possibility. And honestly, that should excite Eagles fans because some of the most successful moves of the Roseman era have come from aggressive decisions made when other teams hesitated. Think about where this roster stands today. Philadelphia already has one of the strongest offensive lines in football. They have elite talent at multiple premium positions. They have depth throughout the roster. That means any move up the board would likely be focused on long-term value rather than immediate survival. Maybe it's an offensive lineman who could eventually become the next cornerstone protector for Jalen Hurts. Maybe it's a defensive playmaker who can help sustain dominance for years. Maybe it's a player who isn't viewed as an immediate necessity, but projects as a future star. Those are exactly the types of decisions championship organizations make. They identify tomorrow's needs before everyone else sees them coming. But while Eagles fans are understandably focused on what could happen during the draft, another situation continues to generate discussion behind the scenes. And honestly, this one may be even more important because it involves one of the most impactful players this franchise has ever had at the wide receiver position. What's fascinating about this story is that it isn't really about what is happening today. It's about what the Eagles may already be preparing for tomorrow. A.J. Brown remains one of the best receivers in football. Few players have transformed an offense the way he transformed Philadelphia's passing attack. Since arriving in Philadelphia, he has provided explosiveness, physicality, leadership, and game-changing production. Defenses have been forced to adjust their entire approach because of his presence. Jalen Hurts has benefited tremendously from having a receiver capable of winning in virtually every situation. That's why any conversation involving A.J. Brown immediately becomes one of the biggest stories surrounding the franchise. Now let's be clear. There is no official confirmation that A.J. Brown wants out. There is no public trade request. There is no announcement suggesting that his time in Philadelphia is coming to an end. But when you look at some of the discussions surrounding the organization and some of the moves Howie Roseman has made at wide receiver, it becomes easier to understand why people continue asking questions about the future. The reality is that smart organizations prepare for every possible scenario. They don't wait until a problem appears. They build flexibility long before flexibility becomes necessary. And honestly, that might be the most important takeaway from everything happening right now. The Eagles appear determined to make sure they are prepared, regardless of what happens moving forward. If A.J. Brown remains in Philadelphia for years to come, the Eagles have one of the most dangerous offensive groups in football. If circumstances eventually change, they have positioned themselves to absorb that change better than most teams could. That's not an accident. That's the result of deliberate planning. That's the result of a front office constantly evaluating not only where the roster stands today, but where it could stand 2 or 3 years from now. When you combine both stories together, a larger picture begins to emerge. One story is about opportunity. The other is about preparation. One is about taking advantage of potential chaos during the draft. The other is about ensuring long-term stability regardless of what happens with one of the biggest stars on the roster. But both stories point toward the exact same conclusion. Howie Roseman is thinking about the future long before most people are. And honestly, that's one of the biggest reasons the Eagles continue finding themselves in championship conversations year after year. The bigger takeaway here is not Dexter Lawrence. It's not one specific draft prospect. And it's not even A.J. Brown himself. The bigger takeaway is that Philadelphia continues operating like one of the smartest organizations in football. They are constantly preparing for possibilities before those possibilities become realities. They are constantly creating options before they need them. And they are constantly positioning themselves to remain competitive regardless of how the NFL landscape changes around them. At the end of the day, Eagles fans should probably feel encouraged by what they're seeing. The draft presents opportunities. The roster remains one of the strongest in football. The front office continues thinking several moves ahead. And while nobody knows exactly what the next few months will bring, it certainly feels like Philadelphia is preparing itself for another important chapter. Whether that chapter includes a bold draft day move, whether A.J. Brown remains part of the long-term picture, or whether new opportunities emerge unexpectedly, the Eagles appear determined to stay among the NFL's elite. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Howie Roseman should aggressively move up the board if the right player starts falling? Do you believe A.J. Brown will still be wearing midnight green 3 years from now? And which of these two situations do you think will have the biggest impact on the future of the Eagles? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's discussion, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join this growing Eagles community. Thank you for watching, and as always, go Birds!